Hello, my name is John Finley, and I'm here at Kenrick Lemon Seminary, where I've been teaching philosophy for the past 10 years. I'm the newly appointed director of the Valor Institute in San Diego, California. It's my great pleasure to offer a few comments about this book that I've put together with these co-authors on sexual identity, the harmony of philosophy, science, and revelation. Thank you to the St. Paul Center, and thanks to all of you for taking the time to listen to what we have to say. So I'd like to begin just by commenting a little bit on the title of the book, Sexual Identity, the Harmony of Philosophy, Science, and Revelation. This notion of sexual identity, just those words in particular, are maybe something more recent in human history. The question of identity has become huge, especially in the last few decades in our first world Western society. Identity politics is itself a whole subdiscipline now. So why sexual identity? Obviously, it has to do with what we are as human beings made male and female. So it's an important question as to what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. But why this notion of identity in particular? Well, I think it's important for us to think about the fact that identity is something that we come to after a certain point in our lives, right? At a certain point, we can identify ourselves as an American or as English or as African. We can identify ourselves as a man or a woman. We can identify ourselves in hundreds, countless of various ways. The notion of identity now has been taken, unfortunately, in many quarters as a given, such that one can simply decide, I am X, I am such and such, I identify as whatever. And of course, this has given rise to the whole transgender movement or ideology that advocates that one can determine who and what one is simply through making an identification. So what we're trying to do in this book is to re-establish a robust notion of what it is, of what the identity of man is, what the identity of woman is within the larger human identity. But it's also to provide something of an appropriate understanding of identity in the first place. Because identity is an important reality for us as human beings. It's important, not only, for example, that I am human, but that I'm able to come to identify myself as human and live that out. It's important, not only that I am a male, but that I'm able to identify myself as a male, as a human man, and that I can live and act appropriately to that identity. So thinking about sexuality on the one hand, this reality that's deeply embedded within our human personhood, but also thinking about the question of identity and how we can appropriate a healthy notion of identity and give the nod to those who see the importance of identity, albeit perhaps in a mistaken way, is just an increased basis or foundation from which we can understand more truly what it is to be human. And that's what I'm especially interested in as a philosopher. So when I first thought about this project, I remember thinking about the question, especially in light of the transgender movement, why would it be wrong to attempt to change one's sex, attempt to change this bodily configuration of oneself? Why would people have a problem with that? When we don't have a problem, say, with changing the color of our hair or with manipulating our skin, perhaps in various cosmetic ways. There seem to be all sorts of bodily changes that we're interested in making to ourselves from time to time. Might have to do with weight, for example, be another example. So why would this be an exception? Why would changing one's sexual organs or hormones be a problem? And it was then, of course, that I started thinking about the fact a little more deeply, and that when we're trying to change sexuality, we're trying to change ourselves, a configuration of ourselves at a much deeper level than, say, the amount of weight we possess or what our given hair color is. And in particular, we're trying to change an aspect of ourselves that has to do with a particular capacity that we have. So men and women are differentiated, of course, as whole organisms by having different systems within themselves. There's not just the reproductive system. You have the male reproductive system and the female reproductive system in two persons. And together, you might say, they make the reproductive system that is human. So in changing our sexuality, we're actually changing, fiddling with the capacities that we possess as human persons. So that gets into philosophical terrain. That raises philosophical questions about, well, what are the male capacities and the female capacities? And how would we identify those? How would we talk about them? How do we talk about the male and female capacities, for example, in terms of our soul-body unity, that soul-matter unity, which is the very heart of what it is to be human, the union, the radical unity and substance of a spiritual soul and physical materiality. So these philosophical questions start to emerge. At the same time, it was clear to me as I reflected on these that philosophy needs close partnership with the sciences and with medicine and with surgery in order to achieve the kind of understanding that philosophy itself ultimately hopes for. And certainly the sciences need the help of philosophy, the partnership of philosophy, as they continue their work. And I'll say a bit more in a minute on that side of things. But why is it the philosophy needs the help of the sciences? Well, partly because of the enormous strides and advances and precision that we have through the sciences now and their accompanying technologies. We know so much more on the physical level about what's involved in being male and female. And this is a tremendous gift that we possess now that's quite amazingly recent in human history. Perhaps only over the last several decades has science made these leaps and bounds in terms of understanding our humanity, our maleness and femaleness on the genetic level and at in the hormonal level and many other levels of our organisms. Among other things, we know much more at this point, for example, about disorders of sexual development. And this gave rise to questions for me as a philosopher, right? So if these capacities that are sexual in us show up in a kind of absent way or in what looks to be a mixed manner, depending on the nature of the disorder of sexual development, well then what does that say about the reality of being male or female? What does that say about the sexual reality within the human person from that deeper philosophical angle? What does that say about sexuality in this particular person from that description of the human person as a spiritual soul in matter? And then I realized, well, philosophy needs to be in conversation with the sciences to achieve a more precise understanding of these particular cases. So on the one hand, when you think about a disorder of sexual development, you don't want to form your understanding, to form your principles based on exceptions. But at the same time, the exception can disprove the rule. So we want our philosophical understanding of what it is to be man and woman to be broad enough to be able to at least account for how various disorders of sexual development occur and what might be said about the people who suffer from some of these disorders in terms of their maleness and femaleness. Now, on the flip side, the sciences, as marvelous as they are, as precise as they are many and fragmented. They're extremely specialized. And we've lost, by and large, a sense, a vision of the whole that can bring the various scientific voices together, especially under a larger philosophical view of what it is to be human, such that there can actually be a robust contribution from all of these voices as to what it is to be human, what it is to be male and female. So it was clear to me that ideally, in order to address this question of sexual identity, we'd want to hear from philosophy, from science, from medicine, from surgery, from psychology, the study of how men and women behave, and then, of course, ultimately, from a Catholic point of view, from theology, which offers an incredible amount of what it is to be man and woman from the bases of divine revelation. After all, when we look at the scriptures, Scripture begins and ends in a certain way with the reality of the male-female distinction. We have Adam and Eve in the garden, and at the end of Scripture, at least analogously, we have this wedding, this marriage, the wedding feast of the Lamb and the people of God. So even there is an analogous understanding of what man and woman are, crucial to a right understanding of Scripture. And it's very interesting, I might point out, that in that initial Genesis story, we have the human call to knowledge and the risk of knowledge as exemplified by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that goes simultaneous with the narrative of the man and woman's togetherness, but then their division once they reach for that improper form of knowledge. And today we see something very much along the same lines occurring, that this crisis of understanding what it is to be man and woman, of course, is a significant crisis just for practical human life. But it also reveals a crisis in human rationality, in human thought, in our whole lives as agents of truth, as the great philosopher Robert Sokolowski puts it. So when we talk about sexual identity, the subtitle of the book being The Harmony of Philosophy, Science, and Revelation, we're very much trying to convey the fact that we as humans are very deeply man and woman, but we are also the one animal that is thoughtful. We are the rational animal. And that somehow these two questions, especially right here and now, are standing and falling together. That in order to recover a robust notion of what it is to be man and woman, this entails a recovering of our ability to be truthful, to perceive the truth, to express it and articulate it and delight in it. It's no accident, again, that the science concerning man and woman itself has only been rather recent in human history, the kind of progress that's been made from the scientific angle. And that it was around that same time that the world of philosophy began to speak a lot about sexuality. It's the 20th century, far more than any previous century in the realm of philosophy, has seen much debate and many words written on the theme of human sexuality. At the same time, you have the Catholic Church addressing the issue of human sexuality in a way that it never has before, particularly in and through the pontificate and the great writings of John Paul II. So in some ways, what I envisage this work being is a kind of philosophical prologue or complement to John Paul's reflections in the theology of the body. A vision of what human sexuality is that moves from the bottom up, from the realm of the sciences with their empirical findings and data, and from the behavioral observations we find in psychology, from the practical work of surgery, from the natural reflections that we're able to achieve through philosophy, moving upward, so to speak, to kind of meet the theological reflections, the deep and profound reflections that we have in a work like the theology of the body. The work is offering a robust vision of what it is to be man and woman from the richness of this multidisciplinary perspective, from these many voices that we hear in science, medicine, psychology, philosophy, and theology. And so it's really attempting to do something positive. And I'd like to stress that while so many issues that confront us now are extremely profound, grave issues with many personal and societal consequences for all of us, ultimately, what's more interesting than falsehood is truth. And in order to be able to respond to falsehood, we need a deeper engagement with the truth. And so while this book does offer much by way of commenting on, for example, the transgender ideology and the deep problems scientifically and rationally with transgender ideology, it's more important that the book is offering an equally deep encounter with what it is to be man and woman from the various viewpoints that we offer here. And I think it's important for us as we believers, as we thoughtful humans continue forward in sometimes these rather dark days, that we keep in mind that the truth in community is what we're all about. That's what we're made for. Truth in community is why we live as human and what we aspire to. And so hopefully reading this book will further that desire in all of you to be more thoughtful, to be articulate in the ways in which you're able to speak with those around you, and to rejoice in the gift of the truth and the realities that we are. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Dr. Andrew Sodergren. I am a clinical psychologist and the director of psychological services at the Rural Woods Institute in Cincinnati, Ohio. The Rural Woods Institute was founded to promote John Paul II's theology of the body. We do that through our educational services. We have a K through 12 theology of the body curriculum that we've developed to use with children in Catholic schools or homeschoolers or parish religious education settings. And we're also developing an online platform to educate teachers, parents, lay ministers in theology of the body and how to bring this teaching to the next generation of young people. I am the director of psychological services here. I direct a practice in Cincinnati where we serve the needs of our community, our region, by providing mental health care that is informed by a Catholic vision of the human person. And grateful for the opportunity to be with you today. In the face of so much confusion regarding gender identity and sexuality, I think it's important for us to kind of go back to the basics in a way. In order to understand what's disordered, we have to first understand what health is, or what a properly ordered sexuality is. In other words, to understand all the ways in which our sexual identity can go awry, we have to first understand what's normal and natural and healthy, what is God's design, so to speak. And so I find it helpful to reflect on how male and female develop and what makes them distinct over the course of our lifespan, and to try to discern from that what are the unique characteristics of men and women, boys and girls, and how those things develop in a healthy way and how that can go awry. And we see, so many fruits and examples today of sexual identity gone awry, but we need to understand some of the factors that may contribute to that, and also, perhaps even more importantly, the factors that contribute to a healthy development of our sexual identity. And so we see from the earliest stages of our development that male and female show up again and again in a variety of levels in terms of how they affect our development, physically and psychologically. And the science of sex differences is a vast field. It's a controversial field for sure, but it's a vast field, and there are many fascinating findings if you dive into this. And the various areas of research on sex differences emphasize to varying degrees differences between males and females that in some cases are more due to what you might call nature or our natural endowment, and others more to experience. Oftentimes we think of nature versus nurture. I prefer the term experience because it's broader. Nurture seems to imply things that are sort of done to us, but in reality, experience is not just things that are done to us, but we in a certain sense, have an active role to play in the various experiences that shape our lives to varying degrees. And experience and nature work together to shape who we are from the very beginning of our life. We can even think about experience in the womb and what the environment is like in the womb, and the early relationship that we're forming with our mothers, and her emotional state during pregnancy, and the kinds of toxins and other things that we might be exposed to in the womb. Different experiences of birth. It turns out that boys and girls actually do tend to have different experiences in the womb and different experiences of birth. And then after birth, our experiences of bonding with our parents or other caregivers, our experiences of fitting in to this particular family group and navigating family dynamics, trying to secure our place in the world through these relationships. Every child that comes into the world has to discern by observing the relationships in their family and interacting with the people in their family, noticing how their parents and others respond to them. They learn how best to secure their place in this family and ultimately in the world. And that's essential for our survival. So it's very urgent and instinctive in us to do this. And through those experiences, we learn about who we are, we learn about our relationships, we learn about where we stand and what we can expect from other people. And we also begin to learn about male and female, and how males and females are treated, and how we act, or how we are treated when we act in a more, you might say, boisterous way versus a more demure or girlish sort of way. We learn how people respond to us in these different types of ways of acting, and we learn how male and female play out in our family system. And as we age, we also learn about that through education and culture. And we have also very formative experiences with our peer group, learning what it's like to interact with same-sex peers and opposite-sex peers, figuring out where we fit in socially and who we feel most akin to, and so forth. And then gradually, as we get older, we have the experience of going through puberty and our bodies changing. We have the experience of erotic attraction, and our experience of male and female can in some ways become even more stark as we go through that process. And then as adults, finding our path in life, our vocation, understanding more about ourselves and our personality and what makes us unique. We see sex differences emerge in so many different areas, and it's fascinating to study them. But it all raises the question, though, of what all of this is for. In order to understand the health of something, such as our sexual identity or our sexual drive, we have to have some sense of its purpose, some idea of what it is for. And the way that I understand these things, based both on psychology, but also on our Catholic faith, is that our maleness is ordered towards fatherhood, and femaleness is ordered towards motherhood. And that these vocations are inherent in us, in our bodies, in our psychology, and that our education, our upbringing, our culture is meant to help boys become husbands and fathers. And similarly, our upbringing, our education, our culture is meant to help girls become wives and mothers, because that is the ultimate sort of fruition or end point for our sexual identity. And unfortunately, there are many ways in which that process can go awry. But the first, I think, and most important point is simply to see that it is a process, that boys have to learn how to become men, how to become husbands and fathers. They have to have the right kind of supports to cultivate the right qualities and virtues they need to say yes to that vocation and to live it out. Similarly with girls, they need to have the right kind of support and nurturance to learn what they need, to develop the qualities, the virtues they need to be able to say yes to their vocation, to spousal love, and ultimately to become a mother, and to live it out well. And even if someone doesn't become a father or a mother in the natural biological sense, I would say that all men and all women are still called to fatherly love or motherly love. In other words, we are uniquely equipped and called to love as a father loves, or to love as a mother loves, and to manifest that in myriad ways in our lives as adults. Now, as I indicated, there are a lot of different ways this can go awry for young people. There are some cases where biology can go awry, even at conception or in the womb. And you can have someone born with ambiguous genitalia or other types of chromosomal or hormonal problems that may affect their sexual identity development. Now, these are in fact biological conditions, medical conditions called disorders of sexual development, which can be rightly treated through medical means. But there are many other conditions or factors that can contribute to our psychological sexual identity. You know, the subjective psychological component of this. So, for instance, problems with our attachment relationships with our mother and father, other sorts of dysfunction or problems in the family of origin, where the lessons that we learn are less than ideal about male and female and what helps me feel secure in this family and in this world. There are a number of things that can go wrong as well in the peer group that make it maybe difficult for me to feel akin to my same-sex peers, and maybe to feel alienated from them or inferior to them, or just so different from them that I can't relate, even though part of me wants to. Of course, there is a tremendous impact of abuse and trauma and other sorts of things. And we're coming to understand too that a myriad of psychological problems in childhood, problems fitting in, emotional problems of various kinds, body image problems, even problems like autism spectrum disorder, all seem to show up in higher rates among adolescents who show up reporting gender dysphoria. Right? This experience of not being at home in my body and with my sexuality, you know, feeling like the sexuality revealed in my body somehow doesn't fit, and having some distress over that. The clinical term we have for that is gender dysphoria. And adolescents who tend to report this show higher rates of a lot of different emotional problems in their past. Anxiety, depression, sometimes suicidality or self-harm, body image issues, and like I said, higher rates of autism spectrum disorder as well, which is really interesting. And all of that really requires a lot more study. Our understanding of this phenomenon, this fairly recent phenomenon of high rates of adolescents, especially adolescent girls, reporting gender dysphoria, is really not very well understood at this point. But we do know that it doesn't happen in a vacuum. A lot of these adolescents do have a history of emotional and social problems. There's also a role, of course, as I mentioned before, for culture and peer influences and things like that. Part of the task of adolescence and young adulthood is trying to understand who am I, where do I belong, and what's my mission. These are psychological tasks that are extremely powerful during the teen years and young adulthood. Who am I, where do I belong, and what's my mission? And for someone who's had difficulty fitting in, especially with same-sex peer group, who maybe doesn't like their body, who maybe has had other negative experiences related to masculinity or femininity, and then is exposed to certain ideas or ideologies through social media and the internet, through peers and so forth, it's not hard to see how they can become enamored with the idea that maybe I'm something other than male, maybe I'm something other than female, and maybe that's why I've had all these difficulties so far in my life. And if that's true, then the upshot of that is I'm also being presented with a path, at least what's proposed to be a path to happiness, right? What's being proposed is if I transition, if I embrace this identity, then I am becoming my true self, and I will be happy, and I will also finally discover where I fit in. And to some degree, it also gives me a mission, right? It gives me a cause to champion. And those are all powerful psychological forces that once a person taps into them, it's very difficult to dislodge them. So we need to have great compassion towards young people who experience gender dysphoria because it is a great source of suffering for many of them. And there's oftentimes a history of struggles or other issues that have culminated in this announcement of a new sexual identity. And we also need to, I think, grow an awareness of how boys and girls need our help and our nurturance to grow up to be men and women, fathers and mothers. That this isn't something that just we can assume happens automatically anymore. I think we really need to get over any sort of hesitation or guilt we might feel about treating boys and girls differently. Their needs are distinct, and they need to be treated differently in certain ways, right? Within reason, prudently. Right? As I said, boys need help to become men, husbands, fathers. Girls need help to become women, wives, mothers. Now, paradoxically, with young people struggling with their gender identity, one of the things that we have to bear in mind is that for many of them, part of their self-understanding is that I'm not like other boys, or I'm not like other girls. Right? They've had difficulty identifying with and fitting in the world of males or the world of females. And so we actually need to, in a sense, expand our understanding of what it means to be male and expand what it means to be female. Right? So we don't want to get hung up on rigid stereotypes that we're trying to force our children to embody or live up to. Rather, there are many ways to be a boy, many ways to be a husband, a father, many ways to be a man, many ways to be a girl, many ways to be a woman, a wife, and a mother. Okay, but the heart of these identities and these vocations is that aptitude for fatherhood and motherhood. That's the essential piece that we can't compromise on or take away. That's the defining character of each. But there are many ways in which a person may embody that. So we don't need to think about a stereotype, that all boys are good at sports, or all boys are aggressive or assertive or something like that, or all girls are shy and sensitive and like to cook or do artistic things or whatever. We don't need to fall into those stereotypes. Rather, it's actually helpful to expand these categories, holding on to what's essential, the capacity for fatherhood and the capacity for motherhood. I think that's really vitally important. And so we need to accept that our job as parents and educators is different when it comes to boys and girls because their vocations are different, and so their needs are different. And for those who struggle to accept their bodies and their sexuality, we may need to I think, first of all, accept them with love and compassion, to recognize that they're on a journey, like we're all on a journey related to our sexual identity, that we can't force anybody to change. and that this is often a long-term sort of process for people as they sort out these questions of sexual identity. And it's more helpful for them for us to see these categories more broadly and flexibly than rigidly and narrowly. In many cases, they may need support for other emotional or psychological problems. They may need help in resolving childhood wounds or other negative experiences they've had in life. But most of all, they need our love, and love has to be based in truth. I believe that people in my profession, the mental health profession, and the medical profession, even ones who are promoting practices that we as Catholics would find highly problematic because they involve the mutilation of a healthy body and the rejection of the sexual identity given to me by God, that the people who propose these things are acting out of good intentions, that they do believe that what they're offering is a help and a service to people. I believe they're trying to show care in their own way. But this illustrates for me a very important point, and that is good intentions, a caring heart, and good intentions to help are not enough. Because if our good intentions are not guided by what is true, then we may in fact doing harm, which shows us once again the connection between love and truth. If love isn't based on what is true and good, objectively speaking, about the human person, for the human person, then we may end up doing harm. Love that is not based in truth ceases to be love. And medical care or mental health care that is not based on a objectively true and good understanding of the human person can in fact do harm. And I believe that's what we're seeing all around us today, is good intentioned care based on a false vision of the human person. And that false vision involves a person, an idea of the person that is disembodied, rejects the importance of the human body, sees the person as basically a disembodied will who can choose for him or herself what to do with the body, who they are, creating themselves in their own image rather than accepting who they are, created in God's image. And this false vision of the human person has been around for a long time. And what we're seeing now with all this gender transitioning and surgeries and so forth is just one more bitter fruit of a tree that's been with us for a very, very long time. And so I think we're all called at this point to come to a new appreciation and understanding of the beauty of how God made us as male and female, and to find the ways that we can to support our young people in accepting God's vision and his plan for their lives. I want to thank you for your attention, for the opportunity to be with you. I hope you found this helpful, and I also look forward to being with you in the Q&A and hope you find that is enriching as well. Thank you.
My introduction into this project is very relevant to my role as a Catholic physician, a woman, and a consecrated virgin. And it's a distant result of taking Dr. John Finley's course as a freshman in college on Euclidean geometry. The first session of that class was on Euclid's definition of things like points and lines. And Dr. Finley asked the class, are these things real? Do points and lines and surfaces exist in reality? And the class, which came from your typical American education, didn't need much debate. The world is messy and three-dimensional, and so points and lines are things that exist in our minds, and they're useful for when we need them, but they don't actually exist in reality. And Dr. Finley, ever the philosopher, sort of leaned back in his chair and said, isn't this a line? Wouldn't you call this a surface? And that began my exit from a reality in which knowledge existed first in my own mind and was applied to the world, and began my entrance into accepting that reality exists first outside me, and what I understand about reality truly exists outside of me and can be trusted. And in fact, my knowledge is only powerful or useful or correct when it reflects what is actually present outside of my mind. And this understanding of reality, which by the way has been common to philosophy throughout thousands of years before our time, is very useful to me as a physician. Only when my knowledge about reality is true can I make actual assessments about patients' conditions. Only when my knowledge of therapeutics is real and cause and effect is real can I actually make treatment plans that will make a difference. So the use of philosophy that really uses the reality as the outside, in which we can trust what we see about the outside world and what is inside us, not being just something that we invent and is convenient and useful and can be modifiable based on what we desire to achieve. That reality must be turned over into one that really reflects what is outside of my mind, coming into in my understanding, and that knowledge being useful in my profession as a physician. Once we can begin to trust the world around us has real meaning that we can abstract and know about, we can start to begin to offer a preliminary definition of a biological understanding of what is a woman and what is a man. To do this, we have to do better than previous attempts, which sort of hope to generalize societal roles for the two genders, or to sort of describe them in vague stereotypes, or to simply look at the cold biology. So the chapter on the biology of what it is to be a man and a woman looks at multiple layers of our biological reality. It looks first at a superficial glance at an individual. What does their body look like to the eye? Next, it goes a layer deeper. What do their genitalia say about what their bodies are able to do? Next, it uses more of the instruments we have at our disposal to look with a scientific understanding of what are their gonads, what kind of cells do they make in their reproductive systems, and what happens at a cellular level when those reproductive systems interact. And finally, we look back again at the whole person, but using an understanding of molecular genetics to understand how men and women differ significantly in every cell of their body, and not just in the nucleus of every cell where they hold their X and Y chromosomes, but in fact at the physiology of every cell, and how there are thousands of differences, both genetically, epigenetically, and functionally between men and women. This allows us to offer a preliminary definition of what is a man and what is a woman from a biological perspective, and forms the foundation of the rest of the volume that looks at how the biology is further built up in our psychology and our spirituality as we interact about men and women in society. The question of what is a man and what is a woman is also very relevant to me as a Catholic woman who has a career. In my daily life, I direct clinical teams of men and women. I engage with intellectual debates with male and female colleagues, and I engage with people on both sides of issues, both men and women. And therefore, I don't match much of history's ideal of what a woman is. I'm bossy, I wear pants, and I tend to think I'm correct when I hear an opinion, even if it's from a man who I believe is incorrect. And therefore, the question of what is a woman and what are her limits, if any, is very relevant to my daily life. What ought women to be doing in society? What are our limits? And the answer to this question doesn't have to dip outside of the reality that we perceive, or outside of the teachings of the Catholic faith, which grasp reality as it exists. So the answer to this question of what is a man, and especially what is a woman, is relevant to me very personally, as well as to my profession. Finally, this question is relevant to me as a consecrated virgin. Being a consecrated virgin means I've been permanently given as a spouse of Christ under Canon 604 of canon law. And that means that somehow I exist as a woman espoused to the second person of the Trinity, not using my sexuality in any kind of predictable way based on biology at all. So our understanding of what is a man and what is a woman has to not only include what we can perceive about reality, which is true and which we can trust to understand what we ought to do in our lives, but our understanding of what is a man and what is a woman has to encompass things that we don't experience and can't imagine, but which revelation gives us. We know by faith that men can become priests and deacons, that men and women can become religious, and women can become consecrated virgins. We must interpret reality with this knowledge also that's given from above our reason, and therefore our definitions of what is a man and what is a woman must include things that escape even the experience which we know we can trust. These two complementary realities of maleness and femaleness, which are in each person even if biology goes awry, are very different from our modern understanding of transgender ideology. which departs from biology by saying that maleness or femaleness is had not in the body, but somewhere else in the imagination or in a decision or in the intellect. That doesn't match the reality that we perceive on many levels within each human organism. It doesn't match how we see people day to day, how their anatomy interacts in reproduction, how their gonads or how their gametes function in reproduction. And it doesn't match the whole of the person's body, which is acting as a male body or a female body across thousands of phenotypic and physiological characteristics. Transgender ideology doesn't match biology because it doesn't have a robust definition of maleness or femaleness that's based in what we can see with scientific evidence. I hope you enjoy this volume, integrating many perspectives on what is a man and what is a woman. I believe it's key to our age to remind ourselves that we can trust what exists in reality, to learn about what the true answer is to what is a man and what is a woman. And we can integrate that knowledge with things that we've received that are beyond our reason to arrive at a true answer. This volume is a beginning, and my collaboration with Dr. Roos on the chapter on biology is only a beginning to answering some of these huge questions about the role of women and the role of women in consecrated life. But I think this is an important beginning, and I hope that you enjoy it.
My name is Deacon Patrick Lappert, and I've been a physician for 40 years. 36 of those years I've been a surgeon, and the majority of those years a plastic and reconstructive surgeon. I served primarily in the military doing trauma and pediatric reconstructive surgery, but since leaving the Navy, I've been in private practice, and I have a lot of experience with issues of chronic wounds and how people suffer with them. I was ordained in 2013, and virtually since the day of my ordination, I've been drawn into this very public issue of gender identity disorders, gender discordance, gender dysphoria, the many names that it has, but it's a very public problem that we're met with. And it happens to be a very terrible state of things as we see them. It's affecting family life, life at school, life at work, and certainly life in the church. And what we're seeing is something that used to be rare, gender identity disorder, gender discordance, has been with us through all the centuries, but it's been historically a very small problem, primarily confined to young boys in the preschool years who will develop a sense of themselves that's discordant with their physical appearance. They'll think of themselves as girls or as women. In nearly 90% of cases, historically, those boys would give up this cross-sex self-identification sometime in mid-puberty, certainly into young adulthood. So historically very rare, historically almost all boys, and historically resolved in over 90% of the cases. But what we're seeing today is something quite different. What used to be rare is now a very public and very common thing. And it's now affecting adolescent to young adult women. That dramatic change in the kinds of people who are suffering with this should cause us to pause and wonder if the public explanation for the causes is correct. So one of the difficulties with this is that the explanation that we're being offered by the medical scientific community is in direct contradiction to everything that we've ever known about the human person, going back to the days when we were huddled in caves and painting on the walls about the life we were living. And this is a very distressing picture because we're repeatedly told that this is an example of the Catholic Church's opposition to science. So it finds us in a very difficult situation. Part of the problem that I encountered as a practicing plastic surgeon is that the public claims that were being made by the medical community, and in my case, particularly the plastic and reconstructive surgical community, is a claim that proposed that medical and surgical intervention could functionally change a boy or a man into a woman, or change a young woman into a man. And this is patently false. And yet the world goes on thinking that these interventions are doing a great service to the people who suffer with gender discordance or gender identity disorder. My experience, direct experience in the capabilities of medicine and certainly in the capabilities of plastic and reconstructive surgery teaches me that this is a gross misrepresentation. And so it caused me to examine the world literature and start examining the problem in greater detail. And what we've found, and certainly what the European communities have found, is that these interventions and these treatments are not in the best interest of the person. People who go into ministry, people who go into education, people who go into nursing, certainly people who go into surgery, have the good of the person at heart. They want human flourishing, they want happiness. But the problem is that the science, the truth has to support it, because if what you're doing to people is not truth-based, you're causing great harms. And this is what we're beginning to see in the world of plastic surgery and transgender medicine. It is a very right thing to examine, and with scientific rigor examine, this problem. We need to look at it carefully because the truth matters, obviously. But we also need to examine it with the mind of the church, because that is foundational to the historic basis for what science is. The science is based in immutable truth and our discovery of that truth. And so our goal is to have a public conversation that's rooted in the science, rooted in the realities. And when we do that, we find that what we've known all along holds true, that there's a fundamental nature, the human nature, and that human nature is fundamentally binary, that there are men and there are women, and the brightness of that distinction predicts the likelihood that the next generation will come along. This is a very important to our understanding of human nature. And the church deserves to be right in the middle of that conversation, because it's that human nature that the grace of God perfects. And he is perfecting it by having become one of us. So to understand what it means to be a human person is no small thing. To understand what it means to be an incarnate being is no small thing, because this is what God has done for us. He has made us this way, and he has made himself that way in a mysterious way, but in a salvific way. So this is not a small problem. This is a problem for all of us, and most certainly a problem for people of faith, and certainly the work of the church.
In many respects, our chapter on the biology of what it means to be a man and a woman is presented very early within the volume for very good reason. Throughout really most of human history until very recently, it was very easy to understand what we mean from a biological sense of what a male and a female member is of any species, not just humans, but any species. And specifically, recognizing the purpose of sexuality, that being related to reproduction. However, in our current age, there have been many errors that have been introduced in that understanding, and arguments that have been made that this distinction between what is male and what is female is not binary, and that it can be presented along an entire continuum. To be able to address that claim, one needs to understand and be very clear about that role, the telos, the purpose of human sexuality. And as we explore within the biological chapter, we consider not only the very basic fundamental aspects of the male and the female in that reproductive act of generating new human life, but also the differentiation of the male body and the female body to carry out the various roles in that process of reproduction. And this builds a foundation to understand the later chapters of how we interact within society and understanding the dimensions of the union of man and woman beyond just the biology of reproduction. But it's amazing as we explored this in greater detail to see the beauty of the design of the human body in its maleness, carrying out and having advantages in carrying out that role of the male. And the same for the female, the biological characteristics, the physical form, the signaling going on throughout every cell of the body to be able to carry out that purpose. The complementarity of the two members of the species, the male and the female, and how they work so beautifully together. And I think those dimensions set the stage as we explore in even greater depth those areas of human sexuality and sexual identity that transcend and go beyond what we've discovered and what we know from the biological sciences. Each one of us as co-authors has grown considerably in our understanding and our appreciation, and I would say very clearly our awe about the beauty of the human person and how we are created in the image and likeness of God, and what that means for each and every one of us.